Wasn't suggesting that consciousness and matter are separate or one or the other. In fact, I would probably agree that it is impossible to separate those two. But is the organization along higher levels of complexity, which you're talking about as grades, is that implicit in consciousness? So that as higher level complexity / grades have consciousness implicit in them, but that becomes expressed or explicit as the actuality.
Every actuality has consciousness in it, and the higher the grade of the occasion, the more fully the consciousness is expressed and the more dominant it is. Does that answer your question? And I'm really interested in pursuing it further if you want to say more. I'm just trying to learn your language.
I'm just trying to actually apply the language here that we're learning today to an experience, to my own experiences in these transphysical realms, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, other dimensional experiences that I'm having, I have had over the years. And the emergence from the subtler planes into what we can experience either at those transphysical realms or physically. It seems to be emerging out of something. So I guess the question is something implicit in consciousness itself, some super high level structure or order that everything that becomes actualized is holographically emerging out of in some fashion.
Well, what you're talking about is what I would call God, right? There is an ultimate actuality of some type, and all ordering and all hierarchical grading is implicit in that, and it all emerges from that. But again, I don't want to say that's consciousness. I want to say that's God, because God is also consciousness and matter. Right? And in a certain way, consciousness is God's moving part. So, because what consciousness brings in is the capacity for selective attention. And so when God attends to a particular possibility, that possibility becomes actualized. And so we can start at the most concrete, the most complex, what Sri Aurobindo would call the Brahman, all and everything, and imagine reality as emerging out of that by a process of successive abstractions. Right? So yes, there is something in which it's all implicit. And then there's through the operation of consciousness, the implicit becomes explicit in manifestation. So I think that begins to address your intuition. Yeah.
Going back to your definition of demon, if I captured it correctly, you said that the demons want to manifest some finite quantity.
They an infinite. They want to manifest. They want to reach God by going to infinity along some arithmetical direction.
Using that definition, I want to go back to my earlier question about distance and measurement in transphysical worlds. And if we're trying to use distance, knowing that it's a measurement in this dimension, if we're using distance, are we actually, it is a limiting factor, but is it a less than positive? You know, does it have a demonic quality to it when we're trying to use distance in a transphysical world?
That's a very interesting question.
It is.
Very interesting question. You see, I've been interested in working at the intersection between the occult and the scientific. Right? And so I've been working really hard to understand the transphysical world by analogy with the physical world. Right? And we know that the logic of geometry is what's enabled us to get a scientific understanding of the physical world. And so I've been trying to articulate the geometry of the transphysical worlds. It may be that what I'm doing is demonic, right? It could be looked at as a kind of industrialization of the transphysical worlds. I see that, and I'm aware of that, and I'm sensitive to it on an emotional level. On the other hand, we're at a critical situation on the planet, and I'm convinced, this is a very long conversation, that industrialism is not going to work for us in the long run. and that we need something else, a new way of relating to the world around us that'll help us secure our basic needs. And I'm convinced that working with the transphysical worlds is a way to do it. So that, for example, if we have here our crops, right, these little plants, right, you see the trees, right, that we can actually, I need a red one, right, that we can actually influence the crops around us to grow in different ways, right, and that we can leave our bodies and go into lucid dreams and work on healing each other and have something that vastly transcends the internet, right? Now, I think, oh, that's neat, right? And I think that in order to do that, we need to have some understanding of how things work in the transphysical worlds. And I think some kind of logical understanding will be helpful. I may be wrong about that, right? So the ideas that I'm putting out are dangerous, right? These are not neutral. They could either be very useful or they might be destructive, which is always what happens when we put ideas out. We're never quite sure exactly, right? But these are the ideas that I've been given. I think they're really interesting, and I want to keep working on them. But I am very sensitive to that objection.
And I'm not using it as an objection. It's more a question, because I absolutely concur with you that we do have. I think that we do and can use the transphysical worlds as a way to work in our own physical world.
That's right.
For planetary salvation.
Exactly, exactly.
And I think that there are ways that we can, that we need to work well with these worlds. I'm just not sure if figuring out things if distance is the tool, and I don't know.
Well, we're going to talk about this tomorrow, and it's certainly not the only tool. By any means. I'm going to suggest at least 3 different approaches, and this is only one of them. But something about this one I just find very interesting. It fascinates me. But yeah.
Thank you.
This brings up a question, maybe a need for definition, at least for me, of demonic in use and how you've used it, where you referenced the corporation having a directive towards expressing infinite abundance, infinite growth.
Infinite profit.
Now, why in and of itself would that be demonic? I mean, isn't an individual trying to experience the infinite?
But what does that mean? You see, there are 2 different ways to experience the infinite, according to this. This is, by the way, a Vedic theory. I got this from Sri Aurobindo, right? And so one way to experience the infinite, we could say, is qualitative. I can feel the presence of the infinite, which is completely right here. And I can surrender to that infinite presence which pervades all of space and which is my inmost being. Or I can try to get to the infinite by amassing as much money as I possibly can and having sex with as many people as I possibly can, right? And just trying to multiply myself until I become so big I encompass the universe. 2 different ways of approaching infinity. One of them is qualitative and one of them is quantitative. And so I guess the simplest thing would be to say that the demonic is in the attempt to approach the divine quantitatively instead of qualitatively.
And perhaps from your description, maybe through the physical world, the inorganic. Would that be accurate?
Not necessarily, because the idea here is that these demonic entities actually exist in the transphysical worlds. So it's not clear that that's necessarily a part of it, although it's a pragmatic part of the way we do it in our culture with consumerism, but I'm not sure it's a necessary definition. I have to think about it.
When we bring up in a collective, as we are today, this type of discussion, it's interesting how when we enter a transphysical state, as we all will tonight when we sleep and dream,
yes,
what will come up. So
it
it'll
is
be interesting as we proceed tonight and then into tomorrow to see what comes up.
I'm very glad you said that, because I was thinking about it last night a little bit, and I was thinking that that on the assumption that what we're saying is correct, and I believe it's correct, that we are surrounded by transphysical beings, and that the activity in which we're engaging ought to be attracting their attention. They should find this interesting, and I'm hoping they'll help us. And I'm interested in looking for evidence of their help. And it will certainly come through synchronicities that might draw us together or bring interesting things, but it also might come in the form of dreams. And particularly those of you who are sensitive, I'd appreciate it if you'd be very alert to what comes tonight in your dreams. And we can share that in the morning. And it might be very helpful and very important. It's you know, I haven't talked about it very much because it represents a sort of edge. You know, the work we're doing at Esalen, and we're doing these videos in part for Esalen, is very scientific. And so we have to, you know, and it's academic in a certain way. And there are certain edges that we don't cross without trepidation. And so the edge of inviting in the help of the transphysical agencies is something we don't do lightly. And also we're not sure what the consequences might be. Right? And it can be dangerous and it can be disruptive. And yet I think it's really important. And I think one of the ways we make it safer is if we consecrate the work that we are doing to the one divine being that transcends and pervades and inhabits all of us. And that we are all the expression of the divine. And we are all each infinitely precious in our divine nature. And that the purpose of our existence and the purpose of our evolution is that of embodying the divine on the earth. And I strongly believe that as we make the big consciousness transition that we're making, and as we open to an expanded cosmology in which we include not just the physical world, we will also be opening ourselves up to the divine in a more profound way. And I think the only way we can safely enter into the dangerous territory of the transphysical worlds is if we invite constantly the guidance and the help and the blessing of the divine. And if we dedicate all of our work and all the results of our work to the divine and to all the sentient beings who are the expressions of the divine in the world. And I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm so glad I got to say it. Okay. So let's stop there, and then we can have, actually we already had discussion. Let's stop here.